Hello, welcome to another Teamfight Tactics video. This video is going to be about transitions, and if you've played any Teamfight Tactics, the idea of transitions is probably pretty familiar. It's going from any one build to any other build. And there's a few different types of transitions you can do. One that people are probably pretty familiar with is one that's a pretty gradual transition. A good example of this would be when you start out wild with a core of Warwick, Nidalee, and then you transition into Shapeshifter, Dragon, Sorcerer, so then you add to those wild Ari, Aurelion Soul, Shyvana, Gnar, and you get multiple types that are online in addition to wild. Maybe you even finish your wild. But there's also different kinds of transitions you can do, and this video is going to focus on that. I think of them as like a really sharp transition where you go from one build into a completely different build. I've also heard them called a pivot or even a comp change. And so what we're going to talk about is what is this sharp transition or pivot, why you would want to do it, both in why you would want to pivot away from the build that you came from and why you would want to go into the build that you're targeting. So just as an example, in this game that you're seeing a video of this VOD here, at this time right now, so I have 6 units out, and I have 3 nobles, 2 rangers, and a Draven. Then when I go forward later into the game, when I have 8 units, what you're going to see is I have, let's back up a little bit there. So I have 6 Sorcerer, Akali, Blitzcrank. And this is, in fact, the same game. So I transitioned from one of these builds to the other. So why did I do that? And how did I do that? So if I go back here, the reason is I did a noble opening, which I think is an incredibly good opening. I think it is the strongest early game opening you can do because the noble buff, just when there are fewer units on the board, Skara said that it's worth between half a unit and a full unit, and I think that's pretty accurate. Wild, you could argue, is about equally powerful. Maybe Wild is definitely better a little bit later into the game, but the game gave me a noble opening. And what you see here is I have the noble opening, and at 50 gold, close to level 7, the game offers me Aurelion Soul and another Kassadin. And I use that opportunity to pivot away from one build into another. So I said that I pivoted away from nobles. Why do I want to pivot away from nobles here? Noble comps get really, really, really bad in the later game. A lot of people, I think, they try out going 6 nobles. I think that build is terrible. I think it does not work at all. It is too reliant on getting Kale, which pretty much every team composition wants. You don't have a very good damage dealer. Kale is probably your best damage dealer. Maybe Vayne, but I don't think that Vayne is actually a very good carry late game. And the noble buff is just not that good in the late game. It gives you armor and on-hit life gain, but if you play against a team with Akali, Brand, or Soul in the later game, what does that do for you? So that's why I want to transition away from nobles. Why do I want to transition into sorcerers? So I'm playing this on patch 9.13, which is live right now, and I think that 6 Sorcerer is just the best build right now. It's not a build that I force every game. You should obviously always keep yourself open to different builds, but overall, if I had my choice, I do think that it is the best build you can do. You do see me experimenting here a little bit with some item choices on Akali. Don't copy that. This is about the transition, not the item choice. I was experimenting. So one of the issues with 6 Sorcerer is how do you get into 6 Sorcerer in the first place? If you try to do a more Sorcerer heavy opening, you're probably just going to get destroyed. 6 Sorcerer is really a build that only turns on when you get 6 of them. Earlier than that, it just does basically nothing. Kassadin is pretty much your only good early unit, and Kassadin is, one, to be fair, one of the best early units in the game. But other than that, you don't have very much. Your backline threat would be like Ari, maybe you have Lulu backing that up, but the Sorcerer bonus, that plus 35%, is just not that relevant in the early game compared to some of the other ones like Wild or Noble. And when you're at that awkward stage where you have less than 6 Sorcerer, you just really don't want those units to be on your board, because you're just going to lose. You're just going to lose all your HP. And you really only want to do it when you have all 6. So this, what I'm doing right here, is actually an example of me making a mistake. I transitioned into it too fast, and as you can see, I'm losing. I tried to go into the Sorcerer build too early when I still had the less than 6 Sorcerers, and I still had 1-star units. So the difficulty with doing one of these transitions and how you do it is basically you're building 2 armies at the same time. So you have the army that's on the board for you that you're actually playing with, that was in this case Nobles, and then you have the one on your bench that you're building, in this case Sorcerers. And how you manage that, how do you have space to build 2 armies when you have, a limited amount of bench space? And the way that you do it is basically by giving up on getting 3 stars or better versions of your Nobles. And so when you're doing Nobles, when I'm doing Nobles and I'm intending on going into a different transition, into a different build, I don't collect more Garens and Veins, and definitely not Fioras, after I have a 2-star of that unit, because I don't want to be in that build in the later game anyway. So what am I going to do with a 3-star unit in the late game? I want 2 stars of Sorcerers, not 3 stars of Nobles. And trying to collect 3 stars of units just uses up so much of your bench space. The other thing that you can do is you plan for it with your item choices. So another reason that I wanted to transition out of Nobles here was the items I got both from Carousel earlier and from drops. So you might have been looking at my board there. So when I had 3 Nobles, 2 Rangers, and Draven, and I had Spatula and Belt on my bench, you might be asking, I think, a very reasonable question: why not transition into Glacial Rangers out of this? Right? I mean, I can even make my Vayne a Glacial. Makes sense, right? I didn't have any fucking bows. So the items that I had built earlier out of what I got, I had a hat and a Shojin. And those are Sorcerer items, those are Elementalist items, those are Ninja items, Assassin items with Akali, but they're definitely not Glacial Ranger items. Like, I guess you would put those on Ash, but then like you would not have any damage. And in Teamfight Tactics, because the items are so powerful, you are really, really influenced in terms of what builds you go into by the items you get, and you do have to react to that. And so as you see here, once I get 6 Sorcerer, I'm just crushing people, because the transition paid off for me in doing that. So you can't just stick with a build just because, like, oh, I have 2-star Vayne. Like, you can't just stick with that when you're not getting the items to support it. The items that I would have needed to go into, like Glacial Ranger, I would have needed a lot of bows. I would have needed Rapid Fire Cannon for Vayne. I would have needed probably Rapid Fire Cannon and Ginsu's, so that's 3 bows right there. I probably, in order to go into a Draven build, because I did sell a Draven there, like a more Protect the Draven comp, it's another idea, I would have needed like Bloodthirster for Draven and probably Rapid Fire Cannon for him also. He attacks pretty slow unless you get some bows on him. But early in the game, I built those 2 items. I built the Shojin and the hat because I was planning some transition like this. Maybe not exactly into 6 Sorcerer. I didn't make like a Locket or anything that was saying I am only going into 6 sorcerer, but you have to plan your transitions pretty far ahead of time. And when I open Noble, I am thinking the entire time, how do I not play Noble? How do I go into something else? And the something else in that case came from building up those different items. The other thing that you have to do to make these transitions work, in addition to preparing with items, is you really have to have a firm idea in your head of when I'm going into one of these very specific compositions like 6 sorcerer, exactly what am I allowed to have on my team. I can't tell you how many games I've massively fucked up because I've thought that I'm making a really good transition and my board ends up being 7 units with 5 sorcerers, Brand, and Gnar or something, because I just miscounted. I thought that I had 6 sorcerer and I fucked up, and I just didn't. It sounds like a dumb mistake, but I make dumb mistakes sometimes. And so something that's drilled into my head that I'm thinking about the whole time when I'm making 6 sorcerer is what I think of as 6 and 1. So at level 7, which is usually where you're going to want to go all in with one of these builds, or at least have an army that can fight, is you have 6 sorcerers and you're 1 non-sorcerer, which in this case for me was a Kali. So when you're preparing this, I'm thinking the whole time, what are my 6 sorcerers, which you don't have much options in. You get the 5 lower cost ones and then either Sol or Karthus. And your 1 non-sorcerer, which for me turned out here to be a Kali. But you have to be thinking about that the whole time, because that's when you're going to replace your current one when you have that built up. So some other examples of when you might need to do this, other than just 6 sorcerer. Ninjas. Ninjas are a really good example here because of the way that the origin bonus works. With 1 of them is good, 2 and 3 of them are terrible, 4 of them is amazing. So you want to put them in, go from 1 to all of them all at once. And so you have to be thinking about, when you're making this transition, what are the 3 units that I'm going to be replacing with my 3 additional ninjas once I level up, or once I switch things in, or am I going to level up and only replace 2 of my units? So you need to be planning that the whole time that you're doing this. Another one would be Elementalists. This is not as sharp of a transition as with making 6 sorcerer because it's only 3 units. And usually Brand is a good enough unit that he'll be in your army the whole time anyway. But you do have to be thinking, what are the 2 units that I'm going to be replacing with Lysandra and Kennen? So when you're playing nobles or whatever, usually you're going to be replacing your backline with that. So you need to be going through that. If you're say you're doing nobles into elementalists instead, you need to be thinking, okay, once I get level 2 Kennen and any Lysandra, I'm going to sell my Vayne and my Lucian, and I'm going to replace those with these other two elementalists, and then I'll have a much better team because I'll have Daisy. You don't want to do it too early. You don't want to do it when Kennen isn't in fighting form. Oh, that's right. I forgot that I survived this game at 1 HP. So something that I think is really important that people aren't doing with making these kind of transitions, maybe the reason they're not, is that people are valuing their early units, especially their early backline, much too highly. Early 2 stars, sometimes even 3 stars of 1 cost units like Tristana, Vayne, and then 2 costs like Lucian, Varus, etc. They're just not going to be able to stand up late game against the what I think of as the 4 really good late game carries, being Sol, Brand, Draven, and Akali. Those early carries just are just not on the same tier as those. And so I think that people, when they get one of these early compositions, they hang on to those backline units for way too long, maybe even the whole game, rather than looking to replace it. And so even if you don't make a transition as sharp as I did here, you don't make a pivot like this, you still need to be thinking the whole time, can I make my composition better by replacing some of these earlier units? Because remember, when you sell like a 2-star vein that you got early, you get the same gold that you get that you put into it, that 3 gold. It's only when you sell 2-star versions of 2 or more cost units, or a 3-star version of a unit, that you don't get the same gold that you put into it. So you're getting your money back anyway. So it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion, to sell it. So that's what I have to say about these transitions. Let me show you, just as a bit of a brag here, that I did end up going to the, let's show you the final battle here. So I hope that this video made sense about your transitions. I hope that you can see why 6 Sorcerer is a build that you would want to do one of these sharper transitions into, and how when you open with a really good early game composition like Nobles, you might not want to stick with that the whole time, and how you can look to doing builds that seem completely unrelated. Like if you tell people, oh, I did, you know, a standard Noble into Sorcerer transition, like that doesn't make any sense, but it is totally possible. And if you leave yourself open to making one of these transitions, you can, I think, win a lot of games that you would have lost by sticking with an early game composition for too long. So for example here, what led me down this path in the first place? So I was leaving myself open, and then what do I see when I have this composition here? Like I have this one, and I see in my shop Soul Cassidon. And then I left myself open because I'm not too attached to this noble build, and I successfully transitioned into 6 Sorcerer and won the game. So that is about making sharp transitions or pivots. I hope everyone liked this video. This is my first attempt making any sort of talking to the camera video like this. Let me know if you have any ideas for stuff that you have trouble with in teamfight tactics, advice that you want to get, situations that you don't know what to do in, and I'll try to do my best to address it either in a future video or in a comment response, a bit of writing. Just let me know. Hope everyone enjoyed.